It says, all right, and we're live. So I'm here on behalf of Repentino with author Tabitha Lord, and we're here going to talk about just what it means to be an author in the life of Tabitha Lord. So thank you for spending time with us today, Tabitha, and
Pleasure.
excited to broach a lot of your topics that you're going to have, because there's a lot of science fiction floating around right now, and I know the students are interested in an author that does that. So we're going to jump right in. And the famous question that we always ask, we represent Repentino, which is a student literary magazine based out of Mexico City. And Repentino in general means just all of a sudden or without warning. And what we're wondering is, at this point, if you took that term of all of a sudden or without warning, how would that apply to you, not only as an author, but as an individual?
All of a sudden without a warrant. Well, honestly, it's a little scary because I'm a planner and I'm a person that likes to live by my lists and my calendar. However, the creative process often brings you the all of a sudden and something out of left field. And when you can't get it out of your mind, I think that's when you know it's worth exploring. So from a personal perspective, when I'm taking on new projects, even if they feel like they've come out of the blue or nowhere or somewhere, I'll always say, let me sleep on it. And I really think about it. And the ones that stay in my mind, I'll say yes to, whether it's a story or whether it's a speaking engagement or whether it's a writing project, nonfiction, fiction. And then in my writing life, it's interesting because I'm also pretty much I'm a loose outliner. And, when you talk about the two different types of writers, the pantsers or the plotters, the seat of the pants or the outliners. And the pantsers scare the daylights out of me. I'm like, how do they do that? But when you actually think about it, they're spending the same amount of creative time in their world and exploring their world. And they're just a little bit more relaxed about trusting that the process happens. I'm a little less relaxed about trusting that the process happens. So I take a lot of notes. I have my notebook with me. But it's usually when I'm in that space that those thoughts do come out of the blue or come out of nowhere or just wow. And it's because I think I've been allowing the ground to be fertile, so to speak. So I try to be open to it, but cautiously realistic when something hits me on the side of the head.
Cool. That makes sense. Yeah, that's awesome. So it's easy to see how that transcends over to being an author the way you explained it. So yeah. So basically, we were listening to, the students brought this up too. They were listening to an NPR broadcast the other day, and there was a segment about how there's a lack of female and women authors in the field of like STEM-oriented areas like science, technology, math, and talking even about how like the lack of coding is not directed towards a certain population, and then it's really hard to get women in the workforce when there's not a kind of like a effort to get more women involved in that area. And so I'm curious because the student said, I wonder if that is parallel to being an author, and the funny thing we were discussing is there was this, I don't know if you're familiar with, it's called the scavenger hunt, youth, a young adult lit scavenger hunt. They do one in the spring and they do one in the fall. And they always gather a bunch of authors together, and for 4 days, you just go through and try to get these clues, and then you can win a lot of their books and things like that. And the students noticed though that out of about 100 authors, or even 20 authors, there's always like maybe 3 male authors, but the rest are all women. So a lot of the students,
yeah.
Sure. And they're like, well, so there's no disparity. There's no need for women authors because they're everywhere. But my argument was, okay, so there's a lot of women authors, fine, but is that means that they're all certain genre? Or I said, does that mean that there's no need for a certain need within writing? Just because there's a lot of women authors, does that mean that's okay? Then we're good. But that's what I was curious about was, as an author, you're from a certain genre.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see a certain need for more involvement of women authors maybe in a certain genre, even though it appears that there's a lot of women authors that are publishing? I'm just curious if you might.
It's interesting because I've come to my writing career later. I didn't write my first book until I was 40. And so, for me, I'm coming into this world, specifically the science fiction world, as a writer at this very time when there's so much awareness. And there's so much openness and willingness to say we need to break down some of these barriers. And so the people that I hang out with are very supportive people. And and it's a really neat crowd, the one that I hang with. And they tend to be the science fiction fantasy writers. And we're a mix of genders now. But I recognize that that was likely due to the hard work of the generation before me, or even not even a whole generation, but the people before me who were breaking down those barriers. And so while I don't feel it necessarily, I haven't felt, I've always felt welcome wherever I was going as a science fiction writer. And I'm at Comic-Cons all the time. And one time I had a gentleman come up and say, tell me about your book. And I told him a little bit about it. And he said, all right, and he said, and he did make a little slightly sexist comment about, it's probably romance or you have all these other things. And then I said, well, A, there's nothing wrong with romance. But B, I said, you might want to try reading it first, because I think I just tell a good story that crosses gender. My goal is to tell a story, a human story set in this bigger setting. That's why I write science fiction, because I like to play with those worlds and those questions that are real, but you can examine them from a little bit of a safer distance. So I said, you might just try it. So he bought the book, and he about a week later, he sent me an email and apologized for his comment. He said, I loved your book. He said, I was taken right in with it, and it was a great story. And he said, and you taught me something about shutting my mouth and not being, assuming something. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, I really appreciate that. But even he was more inquisitive. He wasn't really judgy. So I was never really offended by the whole exchange. So, I've been very supported in my career. But again, I'm coming to it at a time where there's so much emphasis placed on, no, we really all get to have a voice, and there isn't one right way to do this. And there isn't one gender that can, co-opt this storytelling method or this genre. So, but I do think it also matters to have mentoring. And so for me, I think it's important, and it's part of the reason I do these sorts of things, is that young boys and young women can feel access to writing and to creativity and to their creativity. So I think for young women especially, it's important to have a female mentor. But I also, I have boys. I have 3 sons and 1 daughter. So I want my boys to be expressing their creativity, and I want them to be sensitive, and they think it's kind of cool that their mom writes sci-fi and I can still beat them at Star Wars Trivial Pursuit hands down every time. So I get, grudging respect in my house. So I think it's a very important question. I think it's very alive today. And I think my way of participating with that is to try to be a mentor to others that are coming up in this, and just say, our voices matter and we're entitled to have them, and speak them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, why science fiction? Like, what got you into saying science fiction is that's what I was made for? I mean,
I was a Star Wars fan, and Star Wars. So now I'm going to date myself. I already said I read my first book till I was 40. But I was 7 when the first original, Star Wars: A New Hope came out. And I went to see it with my dad, and it changed everything about the way I viewed the world. I looked up at the stars in a different way. I had model spaceships, X-Wing fighters, the Millennium Falcon was hanging from my ceiling. It lit up, and I listened to the music on my record player every single night, the John Williams tune. And my imagination exploded because of this phenomenon. And it was certainly the right time, the right place, and I was the right age to have that kind of an impact. It sort of imprinted on me. But I also loved the idea of, being able to set your stories in a slightly broader context, not to be constrained by our particular world. And I just enjoy that. So Star Wars was definitely the influencer. And I tend to, when I'm watching something on TV, that's the genre I go to, sci-fi, speculative, that sort of thing. I read way outside the genre, though. I read everything across genres, and I just appreciate a good story. But when I tell one, it's just where my imagination goes first. So
that's how you can tell, because it seems like it's real personal, if that's the way it goes right to that spot. So.
It's what excites me. It's when I sit down and I think about writing, there's no drudgery in the imagination part when I'm working on speculative stuff. It's exciting. I mean, the work of it is drudgery sometimes. It's real work, but the idea generation and the thinking through worlds and world building and character building, it's very exciting to me. So
So would you say that Star Wars was your biggest influencer as far as leading you to science fiction, or would there be another? Would you also attach yourself to maybe another author that led you there aside from Star
Not author, not at that age, because really the love started when I was really little. And I was reading Black Stallion and horse books when I was that age.
Wars?
So
Cool.
it was definitely that visual and that expansive, epic. Good. But the other thing that appeals to me, I think, about science fiction is sort of this epic good versus evil battle that tends to occur in it. I like to have these themes that you can play with that are sort of bigger than life, and yet you can drill down to the individual characters that you fall in love with and want to follow, because if you don't have that, nobody really cares about your story. So it's sort of taking this big idea and then, and then putting your characters into that world and having them live and have conflicts and what does it mean to be a hero, who stands and fights. And there's sort of questions for all ages and all people, but I just like setting them when there's space and ships and such. So.
Cool. Your first book, I read your first book. You had met a teacher at our school at Woodbridge. I think her name was not Miss Mayhew. She's gonna kill me. I forget. I'll think of it in a minute. But she was the one that brought the book back. And so Miss Wheatley, sorry. And so I read it. And it's weird reading a book that you know nothing about right. The author. I always feel like I'm taking this really big risk, and like if I just knew a little bit, but I just dived into it, and I loved it. I mean, like I really liked it. And I mean, not saying I was surprised that I liked it, but I usually have to know something a little bit about it that'll say, okay, yeah, I get it. I want to find out more about that. And I didn't have any of that. But what I felt, and I don't know if you intended that when you were writing it, but I felt like there was the equivalent when I was reading the story of the character and the heroine, and as she's dealing with different things, it felt like almost similarity of in real life, like countries having to deal with the conflicts that they have across an ocean in real life, or across these borders that we see in the news every day. And I really felt, now I'm looking back at it after having read it, it seems like there was like a parallel, to like the world and how they deal with different things and their different cultures. And I was just curious if that ran in your mind when you were writing that, the first book.
It absolutely did. I've always wanted to write a World War II resistance story. But to tackle that, the amount of research that I would feel the need to do ahead of time, to do it justice, because obviously we all study that period of history, but to really do a story justice, you need to do a lot of hands-on research, and I'm not quite ready to tackle that. But that idea of who stands and fights, who are the people that can turn their back on their neighbors or turn their neighbors in, and who are the ones, and why in that moment is it this person and not this person? And that quality of character is really something I was playing with through the whole book, and it was directly from my interest in this period of human history and things that you see still. And the thing about World War II, and I think why so many people write about it, there was clarity in who the good guy and the bad guy was. There was real clarity that the Nazis were bad and the things they did were evil. And there's just no question. In today's world, it's a little murkier with, what's happening in the Middle East and whose side is it, the Israelis or the Palestinians, and they deserve a home and so do they. And it's a lot murkier. I mean, obviously terrorism, that's not murky, but these underlying, tribal fights, they're one side doesn't always feel any more justified than the other, depending on your perspective. So I sort of went back to at least to start, I went back to wanting to have sort of a clearly defined evil. And yet still some people are going to capitulate out of fear. And I thought that would be an interesting thing to play with. And now in my last book, I'm dealing with a bit more murkiness in terms of what the good and who are the good and who are the evil. And I purposely wanted to thread it that way and just explore those themes. So I'm doing it, it's just taking 3 books to do it. But yeah, you're absolutely spot on with what you read into it and what I was doing.
So let me remember, but your first book was called Horizon, right? And your second book is called Infinity?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Okay, good. All right. And so your third book, you're working on a third book now?
I'm working on the conclusion of the series, yeah.
That's super cool. I haven't made it to the second one yet. So, okay. I have a little bit of catch up to do, but it was really good. So I'm excited. That's cool. So you mentioned about being a, we were talking earlier, you mentioned about being like a prancer. And the thing is, do
I'm
you,
an outliner, not a pantser.
okay, all right.
Pantsers scare me. I don't understand them.
So, well, are you familiar with them? Because those are terms that are usually thrown around with National Novel Writing Month. Are you familiar with Nano?
Yes, I did Nano one year, and it was awful.
Oh, really?
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
it was
Well,
so stressful.
we've done it like as like an activity out of the library for the last
Sure.
years, and then maybe out of 6, 2 years I finished. And
Oh,
not every year that necessarily don't finish, but we still meet at coffee shops and we
yes.
broadcast. And my favorite part is the part where they have the live write-ins on YouTube, and you can sit there and write, and then it's so exhilarating to hear something you wrote when they're looking in the chat and they see something, you read it out loud. They were like, "Oh, this is really," and when you hear it on YouTube, it's amazing. Like
It's so exciting. I know, and
it's exciting.
writing such a solitary thing that an event like Nano, even though it takes a whole month, is exhilarating. And I do participate. And even though I get into that competitive mode of I have to hit the 50,000 word count, it's really not about that. It's about, it's about the camaraderie, and it's about the discipline that you can create. You're focusing on 1 month of a really good writing discipline. And so it's sort of like a reset button for me too. So I have a love-hate relationship. I really do love it. The 50,000 words is so daunting for me because I really do take 9 months to a year to draft, a 100,000 word novel that's going to get cut down to 85,000 words, and it takes me that long. Short story is different, but the big books take me a while. And so that 50,000 in a month is like, how can anybody do that?
Right.
But
right.
I love the camaraderie, and I love the enthusiasm that we have with each other during that time.
Yep. I think what I've noticed is a lot of people will get burned out if they see that as only the thing, 50,000. And I think a lot of people that are new to it, that's the only thing they hear.
Right.
It's the only thing they sing. But then what I've learned is I need to incorporate all the other little things, like you said, that show the camaraderie, because it's the hardest thing, I think, is to convince them that the word count is not the most important thing. It's the things that you really liked, like I mentioned about the chat, and you hear it mentioned online, YouTube, or those little things that will keep you coming back rather than just being burnt out the first time around. And so, I don't know, like I know Nano is one of those programs, but do you know, or would you recommend other resources or other big programs like Nano that you've come across or heard about that you think are beneficial to writers in the same light?
Not big programs like that, but I'm a big proponent if you can get to a conference or you can join a group. And not necessarily even a critique group, because you got to be careful with that. I think they're very, very good when they're good, and they're very destructive when they're not good. So that's just a whole nother discussion. But I think the value of having, a writers group, and I'm a member of the Association of Rhode Island Authors, and we're a very active group, is more about resources and networking and keeping each other up because it's your tribe, and only your tribe really understands what writer's block really means, and what the fear of when you're smack in the middle of, you're in that middle part and you don't know how you're going to get to the end, or when you're editing and you have to rip something apart that you've spent a year working on and put it back together again. And these are all first world problems, of course, but your tribe understands them, and you can get that support you need. So I love being a part of that association. We have a small subgroup that are the science fiction and fantasy writers, and we get together regularly and do events together. I think, I usually go to the Writer's Digest workshop. Some things are expensive. So, writers' conferences can be expensive, but the smaller groups that are local tend to be really doable, and they put on some really, interesting and well thought out, thoughtful, things. So I would say just, find a tribe, however you have to find the tribe, and whatever works in your area. So I don't know of anything else big like Nano, but again, I think regionally everybody has something.
Well, you mentioned earlier too, which I think is notable, that you said you came into writing and publishing much later, and the thing is that that's a whole interesting aspect, because when we see things, at least on the Eastern Shore, they have their own National Novel Writing Group, then we try to get together in the state. And there's a lot of individuals that are what younger writers don't see, because they hang out with their friends, which are students and things like that. But I don't think a lot of students realize that there's a lot of writers that start sometimes much later, not like as teenagers, but when they're out of college, out of school, and you've done that.
Or you've written your whole life, but you couldn't make that a career. because you had to pay bills and raise kids and do all the other things. So the writing was like a hobby, not a career path. And so when you're older, sometimes your time and space and funding opens up a little bit differently, and that leaves room. And that's what happened for me. And I've always been a writer. If you asked me when I was a kid, what did I want to be when I grew up? It was an astronaut, then a writer, and then it was a doctor, then a writer. And then it always kind of like that writer's thread was under there the whole time. And I did write. And I knew I was a technically good writer. I could write essays, blog copy, ad copy, and I've always had to do that stuff for work. But then the fiction piece was a different animal entirely, the long fiction. And so that was an interesting learning curve, as an adult. But as an adult, I also have the wherewithal to take the criticism and to, really be able to say, okay, it's not the best thing I'm ever going to, like it needs to be edited. There's work I need to do. I don't know everything. I can come to it almost humbly because life has taught me that I really don't know everything about everything, and that's okay. So I can be a learner. And I don't know that I would have had the thick enough skin in my early 20s to really take the kind of criticism that you have to take a book from, the draft phase to the final phase. It's huge.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I never thought of it that way either. So that's interesting. Yeah. I think there would be a big benefit from having younger writers and writers that haven't started even thinking about writing until later, when they had more freedom to have that communication, because I think that even would give each side, depending on what stage in life they started writing and actually publishing, like some really interesting feedback. Knowing they're doing the same thing, but they were just starting at different stages. I think that's, I don't know. I just think
too, you can keep that spark of creativity no matter what you're doing in your life, and my husband owns a company, but he's been a singer-songwriter his entire life, and he's written a ton of music, and he's played out and performed. He's got a beautiful, well-trained voice. We're never going to make a living at that. We had to raise our 4 children, and he, owns a company and that sort of thing. But that thread of being an artist and having that spark and that creativity never has died. And he, in fact, has more time for it now, in a way, than he did before. So I would say just, if you can keep the thread and keep learning, and don't put it aside, but also know that, you don't have to do everything all at once. That hopefully life is long, and you can get to some of the things that maybe you had to put on the back burner, later.
Yeah. So. I think that's exciting that can happen with writing as well, because those ideas that you've been kind of seeing and working through can actually have their fruition even later. But there's no, like you said, there's no rush. And it feels like there's a rush, I think, sometimes when you see people around you doing it and saying, maybe you should be a writer, or there's pushback against being a writer. Like, what kind of career is that? And what are you going to do? But I mean, I think it's exciting to know that by collaborating and talking with authors, I can see that that's just not an endpoint if it's not done by a certain
Right. It's not. And it really, I think even when you've had some level of success, you're in it for the long game. It's not and anybody that thinks instant success, they say, oh, Harry Potter. Oh, I have a friend that was my husband's class in college. So they were 2 years ahead of me, but I knew them there at school. And she just now has had her book on the New York Times bestseller list for, I think, 40 weeks. It's a young adult book called One of Us is Lying. And it's been out there. You've probably heard of it because you're in the high school. It's probably in your library. The one of us.
I've heard of it. I'm not sure if I've seen it, but I know the title. Yeah.
And so she wrote that, and I remember meeting with her probably 2 years ago in a cafe, and we were both, what path are we going to do? And she said, yeah. She said, I wrote my first manuscript, I don't know, however many years ago, and that didn't really. Nobody really wanted that one. And then I wrote a second one, and that one got shut, whatever. This was her third manuscript. This is her third complete work that she's reworked and put out there. And so it looks like, wow, she hit it big, overnight success, 40 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. But this woman worked for years and years to hone her craft, to put out something that was good enough to get on the bestseller list. But it wasn't like, oh, yes, how wonderful. It just happens. No, it doesn't just happen for anybody. And, how many times is the joke with, J.K. Rowling that she get rejected by the major publishing houses? No one will read YA or middle grade that's that long. Well, somebody took a chance, and saw the genius in it. But there was a lot of rejection and a lot of, probably do-overs before the success came. So writing and any art, I think you're in it for the long game. So it's not for the faint of heart either.
Right. You're going to be coming to the Eastern Shore here, I think right around May. Yep. And we're going to be having you go some different places. We're going to announce some of those here in the next couple of days. Do you know anything about the Eastern Shore? Have you ever been here before?
Not very much. Not really, not very much at all.
Okay. And so it's going to be exciting.
I'm very excited to come visit. I've been to Jersey and I've been to, Philly and that, but I've never really come that far south. We've been to DC, but I've never really visited there. So I'm very excited.
Cool. What you've mentioned this already in some of the things that you've said, but what do you think, I mean, to a writer at any level, what have you seen, and not just your what your strengths are and your characteristics, but in general, what would you say to individuals that like would ask, well, okay, so what is a basic thing that applies to all authors that will lead me down the right path? That I want to be a writer. I know I want to be a writer. What will keep me on this path successfully and not let me say I don't want to do this anymore? What would you say that would be the key would be to that?
So I'm going to go with a sports quote that my son actually has hanging on his wall, and it says, "Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard." And any writer that I know that's successful, and the keynote speaker at the Lehigh Valley conference that I just attended and presented at, he said the most successful writers I know work damn hard. They work hard, and that's the truth. You can't just assume that I'm going to write this most brilliant thing. Brilliant things come because somebody learned how to craft something. Somebody, wordsmithed their manuscript 100 times to get it just right, put it out there, took the criticism, rewrote it, maybe had to shelf a book, and put it aside and just say, well, the process, I finished something good. Put that aside. It's not good enough. The next one will be better. So you just have to be in it for the long game, and you can't think that just talent alone is going to get you there, because it's a hard industry. The nice thing is there's not one right way there's not only one way in anymore. There are many paths. And so, as young writers, the platforms like Wattpad or Inkit, where, the writers can put their work up for free and readers can interact with that work for free, is a way to really hone your craft. It's almost like you've got a world full of beta readers out there that are helping you get better at what you do, and you're getting positive feedback, but you're also getting, and I think you have to be able to take criticism. We artists are so famous for having thin skin, but you can't have thin skin. Yeah. And it hurts. It's no doubt, I'm going to get a t-shirt made that has my favorite worst 1-star review, which says this book is as boring as tepid oatmeal. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure it's a lot of things, but tepid oatmeal, I don't know. It doesn't. It was clearly one of those just like nasty troll kind of people, whatever. But they still hurt, it still cuts because it's so personal when you've created something and you're putting it out in the world. On the other hand, you have to be able to hear, from people that do it better, or you just have been doing it longer, where you can improve. So those are the things. I think, hard work and toughen up a little bit, because you're going to have to hear the criticism.
Yeah. Well, when you go to conferences and when you go to book tours and you talk to groups, whether they're high school, adult groups and writing groups, do you have, when you go into those events, whether the conferences or you're speaking or you're just attending, and do you have a couple things that you're going into saying, this is what I want to get out of it? Like, what are some of the main things that you feel like as an author, whether you're going to get it or not, you're really hoping that you will get out of those experiences?
Yeah. So when I'm going to, when I'm signing, so if I'm at a Comic-Con and I'm at a booth and I'm signing things, I love to go to those because I'm a fan too. So I don't do the hard sell. I stand and say hello to people and comment on their costumes and, are you having a good time? Because I'm really having a good time. So I show up authentically at those things to be with my fan base. And when I have someone stop and say, I read your first book and I'm so excited to get your second book, and we can talk about something we both love, which is the genre, that's exciting for me, and to hear that my words participated in this genre for somebody else in some cool way is awesome. So that's one way of getting fed. When I go to a conference, when I'm speaking and I'm teaching, I'm hoping that I'm inspiring someone else, and I'm inspiring them and encouraging them, but also saying, be realistic. It's going to take a while. It's a lot of work, but stick with it and you can do it. And when I'm going to attend something, I'm just hoping to refill my own coffers sometimes and learn a little something new about craft, or be inspired by somebody who I think is particularly great and kind of finesse something I'm working on. So I sort of have 3 different things I'm looking for depending on the, the place I'm going where other writers are. And, again, one is just for fun because we all are fans first, usually when we're at a con,
Right.
so, and then teaching is,
Yeah.
I hope to inspire somebody, and then I hope to learn from the masters, when I get to be in their space. So.
Awesome. So if people want to, I know some people were asking me before, like, where can we go to find out where you're going to be and things like that. And as those events are developing, I know that if people email me at harry.break@gmail.com, then we're going to go ahead and be able to communicate with people about having you talk to them in groups and things like that. But where can people go in the meantime to check out information about you as an author and about your books that you've written already, and find out a little bit more about, like what is behind your writing and things like that? Where are some of the best places they can check out?
So my website is tabithalordauthor.com. And on my website, I have an event page. So all the big events. So like I know I'm coming to see you guys now that we have the dates locked down. I'll put that in there. I'll probably just give it a generic title and not put all the details. But, when I'm at a Comic-Con or I'm, at a signing or something, I have that on my website. If you sign up, subscribe at my site, I send out a little Monday morning newsletter just called Monday Musings. And, sometimes it's just thoughtful, things I'm thinking about. Other times it's, hey, I just published a short story with this magazine, go check it out. So it's just like little tidbits. I don't overwhelm. I literally only communicate on Mondays. Even if something fabulous happened on Tuesday, I will wait till the next Monday to send another email out. So, I don't like to overwhelm people. But I do find that by, communicating and by just sort of like dumping out my head sometimes on there, people they get to know me, and we have conversations, and people really email me back and say, hey, really like that story, or what you said today really spoke to me. I'm in a really dark place right now. And, those words were important to hear, that I'm not the only, so that's super important because it's my community too. I'm building it back and forth. And so my website, you can subscribe to my newsletter. I am all over Twitter, T-Lord Author, I think, right? T-Lord Author. What's my Twitter handle? Yeah, that's it. I'm pretty sure. And Instagram and Facebook. I trying the whole Pinterest thing, but it just doesn't stick for me. So those are the three social media things. And I'm really pretty good about, I'll follow anybody back if I vaguely know that you're a writer or some group I've met you in. And, so.
Yeah. It's interesting because from the beginning to where we've come full circle about you as a writer, though, I remember one of the big words that have stuck out and it keeps on coming back, and what you're talking about is like talking about this community and a tribe. And it's interesting how you keep on talking about how the support that comes out from you as an author, and like picking each other up and encouraging each other when you feel like, man, where's this going? And that's like a mini microcosm of what happens during National Novel Writing Month. But
Yes.
I think it's interesting to show and let writers know that's just maybe it seems like that's a peek into what can happen all year round when you surround yourself with a group of people that keep on motivating you and pushing you to doing that. And don't be burned out in a month, because it is like you said, you're in it for the long haul.
Yeah. And sometimes you have to step back and take a break, and that's okay. That's okay. But your tribe is there. And I met years ago, I met a friend at the Writer's Digest in New York City. And when I was down in Philadelphia this last time, I stopped and stayed overnight there because we can't wait to get together and talk books, and just, we're so excited. We're each other's critique partners and beta readers. So, that's been a long-standing thing, but we genuinely are excited for each other's successes, and we're genuinely understand when the other person's having a dark time, and there's nothing like somebody that gets it, to be able to say, yeah, I'm there with you, let's have a drink. I don't care everything.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. No, that's cool. That makes the whole aspect of writing, I think, a little bit more real and a little bit more realistic as far as like sticking with it and making it successful for everybody. So, yeah. Well, we're going to save some more questions for you when you actually are here in person. And I appreciate the time that you've actually given us today. And we're excited to see you in person, but we're also excited that they'll be having an Authors Among Us in Mexico City with Repentino down there. And we're slowly doing that here. And we're excited to have you be a part of that starting, here on the Eastern Shore. So we'll be looking forward to, I believe it's May 5th. You'll be coming in that evening, right? Yep. And you'll be here for a couple days. So we're going to see if we can kind of figure out all the different spots that are asking for you, where we can get you to go in. So we really appreciate you.
Looking forward to it.
Yep. No, we're excited. So we'll talk to you soon, but thank you very much for the time you've given us today. So
thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
Sure. All right. Thanks.